It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. This week, I have for us Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, which is from 1958 and is directed by Nathan Hertz. Now, Hertz has an interesting lineup of movies that he's worked on. In particular, he was the art director for the Academy Award-winning movie How Green Was My Valley. And later, he went on to direct movies like The Deadly Mantis, 20 Million Miles to Earth, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, The Brain from Planet Arrows, and Jack the Giant Killer, as well as Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. So, obviously he was pretty well known when it came to doing what would be, I guess, deemed either monster movies or B movies when it comes to like the sci-fi and horror genre. But he did work on How Green Was My Valley, which is a pretty significant movie. I think that's a movie that's considered by most to be rather classic. In addition, this movie was written by Mark Hanna. Now, just before this, Mark Hanna had written The Amazing Colossal Man. So I don't know if he had a thing about giants or what, which I think brings us to the big elephant in this room. Let me preface this with a little bit of a story here. Many years ago, a friend of mine took a what looked to be a digital painting or some sort of some sort of modern take on Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and it was just a still picture, and he did some trickery with it to make it look like it was a little bit more 3D or a little bit more depth in the picture. He it made it look like it was animated a little bit, and he uploaded it to YouTube. Now, what we would all soon discover, as this little video became a huge hit on YouTube, he was noticing from comments or from various things that would be, sent to him or whatever, but there is a rather vibrant giantess fetish out there in the world that I would have to assume, and I'm not going to kink shame anybody here. I mean, when I say that, there's a rather vibrant in the way I said that, I don't want anybody to think I'm kink shaming you or anything like that. But I had never really thought about that before. It's like, yeah, okay, sometimes there's giants, sometimes there's giant women, whatever. Oftentimes giants are wearing loincloths or very basic, what are those things called that women wear? Bandeaus. Stuff like that. Okay, yes, there is a certain sex appeal to it, I imagine, but I had never really thought about the whole giantess fetish before. Never really even thought of it. How young I was back then. But as it turned out, that it's a pretty vibrant fetish community out there. You don't have to go very far on many sites before you start seeing a lot of web girls and stuff like that who will do various different types of fetish videos and stuff like that. Yeah, there's going to be giantess, and then it's kind of the other fetish that often ties into that, vor, which is when you're eaten. So I didn't really realize that, but I would have to assume that it started somewhere, and I would have to assume that it would start probably with this movie. Yes, there have been stories about giants. Yes, there have been books written about people who became giants, or like Jack and the Beanstalk. But the giant in Jack and the Beanstalk is a little bit more like, more along the lines of an ogre more than anything, not really a giant regular person. I would have to assume that this movie has a place in a lot of people's hearts as being kind of really the beginning of that, of the giantess fetish. I don't know if that was something specifically that Nathan Hertz or Mark Hanna was attracted to. I think it just sort of happened, which in and of itself makes for kind of an interesting historical standpoint for this movie when it comes to its place in pop culture and people's, I guess you can just say, their sexuality and their sensuality of things. So take that for what it is. I think I better stop talking about this and actually get on to the movie. So the movie begins with a news report about a ball of fire that's kind of moving across the sky. And there are several places that are reporting it, and the news... The news guy basically is kind of making fun of it a little bit, but he says, oh, it's going to be over our heads here tonight. Well, sure enough, it is a real thing, because we meet Nancy Archer, who is played by Allison Hayes. Now, Hayes had been in one of the movies that Mark Hanna had previously written. I've got a little bit more to say about that here in just a minute. But she plays Nancy Archer, who is a wealthy but also kind of emotionally unstable woman. She has spent some time in a psychiatric hospital, but she encounters that glowing fireball. It looks like a big pearl when it lands. She freaks out about it. She drives off the road. She can't get her car started to leave. Soon we see a giant hand reaching out for her. She's rather distraught by this, and so she has to basically run back to the town that she lives in, which I think it's kind of a Southern California, like edge of the desert type of town. But she makes it sound like that the giant was reaching for this gigantic diamond necklace that she was wearing. It's not just any old diamond necklace. They actually say it's the Star of India, the most famous diamond in all the world. She wears it when she goes out driving in the desert. To which the sheriff says, maybe you shouldn't wear that. You know, there are people, there are all sorts of weirdos out here in the desert. Now, that does come back into play later. You think, wow, that's just kind of a random thing to have in this movie, but it actually comes back into it. Her husband is still in town. Her husband is Harry Archer. Harry is played by William Hudson, who was in The Amazing Colossal Man. So he was in another Mark Hanna movie, and I have a feeling that comes from this movie was made by a small independent studio. I have a feeling that if they could get the same actors, the same writers, as many of the same directors or whatever that they could, they would probably just make however many movies back to back to back that they could. That's my guess, knowing how a lot of those independent studios would have probably operated in the 50s, particularly these types of movies. This movie alone is only 66 minutes, so these things were cranked out really, really quickly. But he is a philanderer. He is almost unabashedly cheating on his wife Nancy with local floozy Honey Parker. Now, Honey Parker is played by Yvette Vickers. She is, we talked about her back with Attack of the Giant Leeches. She was a Playboy model after this movie came out. She is oftentimes kind of playing the cheating girlfriend, or the girlfriend that somebody cheats on their wife with, or something like that. Easy to see she's kind of got a less than girl next door look to her, which is why I like her. Anyway, so Honey basically wants Harry to leave Nancy, but he's not really a big fan of that, because you see Nancy's really, really rich. Honey even actually mentions, well, what if your wife died? And of course he's like, hey, what are you talking about there? She's like, I didn't say anything. You're the one thinking it now. Keep that in the back of your mind for later in the movie. So as Nancy kind of makes her way back to town, she talks to the cops about what she said she saw. Of course, everybody thinks she's a drunk because she does drink quite heavily. She has emotional problems. A lot of people just think that she's crazy. At one point, the sheriff tells his deputy that he will go out and look for whatever it is that Mrs. Archer says, because since she pays the most taxes in this town, they're going to do whatever they can and bend over backwards to check out the things that she says she saw. So she's a big deal in this small town. Basically, she tries to tell Harry also what she saw, but he's kind of like, yeah, whatever. And he's kind of sweet to her and puts her to bed. And she talks about how it's like, well, why can't you always be this sweet to me? Why couldn't you be, like this all the time with me? So on and so forth. But he ends up going back out to see Honey. He talks about like how, hey, remember, if we play this cool and we play this right, and he holds up the Star of India and it's like, hey, remember, you're going to be an extremely rich floozy before we're done with this. Later on the next day, Nancy wants to go and investigate more. She's also, now that she's kind of had a good night's sleep, she's kind of back at it with with Harry. She sees a news report that basically is humiliating. It makes fun of her for somebody has blabbed that she has seen a satellite and that she saw a 30-foot giant. On top of that, they also mentioned that she and Harry are not getting along very well right now, and the newscaster, which, by the way, this is not news. I mean, this town is too small to actually have its own TV station. But he's kind of like tisk tisk. You shouldn't be, that's handsome Harry, and oh, by the way, Harry, you should, you're obviously married to her because of her money or whatever. It's really embarrassing and kind of humiliating, and I feel bad for Nancy in this movie. I'll talk more about that here in a little bit too. But so anyway, she eventually tells Harry, hey, we're going out there and we're going to go check this crap out that I said that that I saw. And after driving around the desert all day and Harry just kind of putting up with her, and they do finally eventually see the big giant space pearl. And again, the giant makes himself visible again, and he is seemingly reaching out for Nancy. Harry shoots him a couple of times, or tries to shoot him a couple of times, and then he just gets in the car and goes back home. He ends up packing up his shit. He decides he's going to go pick up Honey, and they're getting out of town. Well, before they could get out of town, the cops find him, and they want to question these two, because it's known all over town that Harry is sleeping around with Honey Parker. So they want to ask him questions, and by the time they begin the questioning, Nancy's been found. She's been found on top of the pool house at home, and she's irradiated. So, the doctors talk about like, okay, we got to give her these shots, so we got to make sure that she stays, in bed and resting. Her drinking problem isn't making any of this great, and we do get a little bit of backstory during this period of time that her emotional state kind of ebbs and flows, or her drinking and her mood kind of ebbs and flows with her emotional state, kind of building her up to be both a typical quote-unquote crazy woman, but also a little bit sympathetic, because Harry's kind of a dick. We see that all the time. But so what Honey overhears, though, is that the doctor says that there has to be an exact measurement of the serum that he's injecting into Nancy. And she's like, hey, Harry, you can get with this future Playboy Playmate if you want. All you have to do is give her more than 7.5 cc's of that serum. And Harry's like, yeah, I'm up for that. I'm going to go do that. But by the time he gets upstairs to administer the overdose, he discovers that Nancy has grown to enormous size. And he basically is going to be given, it's kind of like one of those things where they can operate on her to probably reduce her and cure her, but the doctor can't do it without Harry say so. So he decides he's going to hide out with Honey Parker and basically avoid doing that because, as Honey said, well, just stay on the run and she'll eventually blow up and pop like a balloon. Well, she wakes up, she's incredibly pissed, and she knows exactly where Harry is, so she goes looking for Harry and Honey. As she finds them at the local saloon, she busts in with her hand and kind of like tears down part of the building. That kills Honey Parker by having part of the building fall on top of her. I don't think Yvette Vickers actually survived any of her movies, now that I think about it, but I digress. She ends up picking up Harry, and when she's kind of walking off with him, the cops are like, hey, put her down. The sheriff begins shooting at her, but she's standing behind an electric wire pole, like a electrical pole. And he shoots one of the transformers, which then explodes. I assume it electrocutes her, but it also killed Harry. And the movie ends with both Harry and Nancy Archer dead on the ground. Now, let me get to the three things I like about this movie. First and foremost, this movie plays like a soap opera. It saves all of the giant woman, the giant Attack of the 50-Foot Woman stuff for the last 20 minutes of the movie. But the first 45 minutes or so of this movie really does play out as this high emotion philandering husband, floozy that wants the philandering husband because, well, if he can get rid of his wife somehow, he's going to be rich. If he's rich, she thinks she'll be rich, all of that good stuff. But it's engaging. It really is. And that kind of leads into my second like directly, which is Allison Hayes playing Nancy Archer. Like I said, she's kind of set up as being just the typical quote-unquote crazy woman. However, I think she's also relatively sympathetic, too. We know Harry's a piece of shit. The first time we see Harry, he's with Yvette Vickers, and hanging out with Honey Parker. And he's talking about being over his wife and needing to get rid of her, even going so far as being the first person who really kind of seriously considers whatever he has to do to absolutely get rid of Nancy so that he and Honey can just, I don't know, get drunk and, I don't know, fuck all the time. I don't know what it is that he's out after, but whatever it is, he needs to get rid of Nancy, and he's a dickhead about it, and it's almost like he wants to purposely be a shithead to her so that she drinks more and that endangers her health that much more. So yeah, Allison Hayes plays this very interesting because she's actually younger than Yvette Vickers. As far as the actress's actual ages when this movie was made. What's funny is she looks older than Vickers. So she looks like a woman who is maybe kind of dried up, if you know what I mean. Like she's no longer the young, sexy, rich woman. She's kind of been beaten down by life, by her philandering husband. He wants to be done with her because maybe she's starting to look a little older to him. But she's actually only 28 years old when this movie came out. So she actually convincingly plays that really, really well too. So it's a pretty good performance, and it's worth feeling bad for her too. Thirdly, of course, the iconography of this. The effects of the giants in this is not very good. Instead of them being superimposed on top of the scene, they are. It looks like a double exposure to where some of their parts are kind of see-through. It's not a very great effect. The poster and the cover of the DVD, all of that stuff looks like she's attacking, a city with the interstate running between her legs and everything, like under her. That's not this at all. She's a giant woman in a desert town. They couldn't put her into a city setting, and they certainly probably weren't going to have the money to shoot in a city. But still, the point is that the iconography itself is very classic, and it's during a time in which giant people, giant monsters, giant everything, giant bugs, all of that was the 50s. And but Attack of the 50-Foot Woman is something a little bit more special, because it was the only movie at that time that had a giant woman. Now later there was the movie that came out in the 60s with Beau Bridges about the teenagers who took an enlarging potion. It's really bad, but that's a movie that came out later, and yeah, there were multiple giants, and the effects for that was better, but that was made with more money and so forth. So, but the iconography of this is really, really important, and is something that is referenced and used and constantly available for people to see and to understand and to basically connect with. And the title alone is iconic, so it all plays to this really nice kind of charming monster movie that is not particularly great, but particularly memorable because of what's in it, what it does for the first time, and that a movie that was made for, I don't know, like $80,000 or $60,000, whatever it was, ended up making like $800,000 in the late 50s. That's a huge hit, and it's deserving of that, and it's deserving of the reverence that it gets as well. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Now, don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure each and every Wednesday morning, and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon. All of that stuff is found at filmseizure.com. All of those things are also found places where fine podcasts can be looked up and downloaded and listened to, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and Audible. Additionally, you can hop on over to Facebook and Twitter, and you can follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. And while you're at it, do me a favor and head over to my website, bmovieenema.com, where you can read new text articles and reviews each and every Friday morning. And you can also follow the B Movie Enema page on Facebook and Twitter by searching for just that, B Movie Enema. And while you're at it, go on over to YouTube, find the B Movie Enema channel, search for B Movie Enema. That's where you can find episodes of my movie hosting show, B Movie Enema, the series, and get ready for season number 2, which is starting this September. So until next week, stay spooky.